Her? Pretend she doesn't exist. That's what he said, right in front of the bankers, right in front of the agent holding the rider I wrote. But let me rewind. 3 weeks before that, I was standing in the server room at 7:03 a.m., holding a laminated power map nobody else had ever bothered to read, rerouting the backup generator feed because someone on the C-suite's golf chat decided to optimize the breaker schedule. Again, no call, no thanks. Just another Tuesday for the woman with the keys to everything that only matters when it fails. My name is Ava Reyes. 12 years in, they still think I'm background, like drywall or printer ink. The type of person who doesn't make PowerPoints but makes sure the power stays on. I don't wear heels. I wear shoes I can kneel in. Because when the city calls about missing HVAC permits or when the bank wants a copy of the original merchant agreement from 2011, they call me. Not because they remember my name, but because no one else can find anything. I am the system beneath their swagger. If you've ever worked somewhere that functioned just a little too smoothly, odds are there's someone like me behind it. We don't give speeches. We leave folders, indexed, signed, time-stamped. And if this already feels a little too real, hit that subscribe button, toss a like, and maybe the next time a woman quietly keeps the lights on, someone might notice before it's her name on the exit memo. Seriously, it helps our team out more than you know. Back to it. June Park was the only one who noticed. She joined 2 years ago. Soft voice, big eyes, always carried a black Muji notebook like it was a survival kit. I started handing her the hard stuff early. Expired license renewals nobody had tracked. Water main paperwork from the basement filing cabinet. The access control logs from before we moved to badge swipe. She didn't flinch. She listened more than she talked, and when she did talk, it was always precise. Eva, the retention log from 2015 is misfiled. Should I re-index the whole drawer or just label the outlier? I knew she was going to need armor. Not for the work. For the meetings, you'd be shocked how quickly a junior woman gets erased in a room full of men playing Empire. So I coached her quietly, like my old mentor did for me, what not to say, how to pivot, how to nod without agreeing. She learned fast. A week before everything imploded, I got a routine city email. Subject line: upcoming certificate release, custodian of record needed. Standard boilerplate. But it was the last occupancy permit left before the sale, tied directly to the 370mm valuation everyone kept whispering about behind frosted glass. I forwarded it to facilities, CC'd legal, flagged it in the compliance tracker. Crickets. Then came the announcement. A lean transition, new ownership, celebration donuts nobody touched, and a joke from the owner, Rick, of course it was Rick, about how Ava's just binders and badge access, followed by that shrug laugh every man uses when they think they're charming and harmless. Then the killer. Her, pretend she doesn't exist. That was the moment the air changed. Not for them, they were too drunk on spreadsheets and bonus multipliers to notice, but for me, that was the second I stopped reminding them who I was and started making damn sure they'd remember. Not my name, my authority. I didn't raise my voice. I just started writing. I didn't even get the calendar invite for the first diligence call. Found out it happened when June forwarded me a recap someone had dumped in a Slack thread labeled More Acquisition Hype. There it was, a neat little bullet point, operations continuity, green lighted. No mention of permits, no mention of retention compliance, no mention of me. The same morning, the owner, Rick, in his Patagonia vest and startup grin, despite being closer to Medicare than Metaverse, made his grand hallway announcement. Standing outside the break room, half-chewed bagel in one hand, he beamed like Santa in Q4. Big news, folks. We're finalizing a $370 million transition. Lean team, fresh blood, no dead weight. Then, like it was a punchline, he jabbed a thumb vaguely toward my cubicle and said, Eva, she's just binders. He laughed. Hell, pretend she doesn't exist. They laughed too, not because it was funny, but because Rick paid the bonuses. And when someone who writes the checks makes a joke, people laugh like it's the State of the Union. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I logged into our archive server and ran a report on every document that had my initials in the custodian field. 7,812 files, dating back to 2011. I downloaded the list and saved it in a private folder named When They Ask. My inbox started to flood, but not directly, always through intermediaries. A junior in finance asking for a copy of our latest W-9, a facilities contractor asking who held the occupancy permits, a panicked email from someone in marketing, of all people, trying to locate the utility tax waiver I'd filed 3 years ago to avoid double billing during expansion. They needed me. They just didn't want to admit it, and so I stopped replying right away. I started logging who asked for what. More importantly, I logged who didn't CC me, but clearly expected my work to materialize like the coffee in the Keurig. I started tagging requests. Ghost tasks. By Friday, I had 22 of them, each one something critical routed around me like I was already gone. That's when June slid into my office like a shadow. She closed the door gently. They asked if I could verify access logs. She said quietly, "Said you were unavailable." I didn't even sigh, just nodded. "Forward me the request. Then do nothing unless I say otherwise." The buyer's due diligence checklist was forwarded to me late accidentally by someone who clearly meant to CC Erica from Ops, but typed my email by mistake. I opened it. Page 4. Continuity of custodial authority required. Page 7. Evidence of lawful transfer, occupancy permits, merchant agreements, utility controls. They were marching into a 7-figure sale with a signed checklist that relied on me, Eva Reyes, the woman they were actively pretending didn't exist. I stared at that line, continuity of custodial authority, and something in me settled, not in a soft way, in a steel to the ribs, engine piston, call the attorney way. If they didn't want to acknowledge my existence, fine. But the building, the payments, the permits, they were all wired through me like veins, and those don't keep pumping just because some guy in a golf shirt says so. Let them draw their pretty diagrams and forget my name. I was done reminding them. I was going to rewrite the one place they still needed me, the fine print. It was a Thursday night when I wrote the trap. The office had long since emptied. Last sales guy gone, still talking on his Bluetooth about upside, janitor humming to himself near the vending machine. I stayed behind, cracked open my drawer, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and began writing. Not a manifesto, not a resignation, just a writer. 2 pages, clear font, plain English. Nothing fancy. No legal poetry, no burying the lead, just a surgical insertion into the asset purchase narrative they thought they owned. Title: Continuity and Custodial Authority Rider. Section 1. All assets requiring regulatory, financial, or operational custodial clearance shall be deemed non-transferable without the wet ink signature of the current records custodian or named successor. Section 2. Successor, if not current custodian, shall be documented in the custodian index on file with the city and all relevant agencies. Section 3. Effective date triggered by custodian counter-signature. I named June Park as the successor, and I didn't ask her. I told her. The next morning, I handed her a cup of coffee and slid the rider across my desk. She read it in silence, eyes narrowing as the pieces clicked. "You're tying the sale to the records transfer." I nodded once. "They're walking into a $370 million deal with no idea how deep the roots go. We are the roots. I'm making it law." June didn't smile, but something passed between us, something sharper than trust. Alignment. We drafted a modest consulting agreement, continuity services, scope tightly defined, capped hours, termination clause buried like treasure. I filed it through a shell LLC registered to my sister's address in Temecula. Nothing shady, just quiet. Legal, invisible, unless you were reading closely, which I knew they wouldn't. They hadn't even read the damn city checklist. I logged into the city's digital portal that afternoon. Occupancy permitting, utility registration, merchant record custodianship. One by one, I updated the official contact of record to Eva Reyes, custodian. Then I added a successor custodian, June Park, effective upon custodian counter-signature. No alerts, no confetti, just a quiet update time-stamped 3:44 p.m. After that, I moved the wet ink originals, not copies. Originals, permits, licenses, board minutes, compliance attestations. They lived in a locked drawer under my desk, inside a fireproof accordion file I'd bought from Staples 6 years ago. I walked them to a bank downtown, rented a box, placed them inside, and updated the custodial index with the box number, institution, and key holder. Me. I printed 2 copies of the rider, one for the diligence packet, one for me, and tucked them into a binder labeled Final Transfer Prep, the kind of bland title that would make even the sharpest VP skip right past. By the time they noticed the weight of what I'd done, it'd be too late. They wanted a sale with no friction. I gave them a signature line they couldn't legally ignore. They wanted to erase me from the narrative. Fine. But try running a $370 million handoff without the woman who holds the key to occupancy, processing, and retention compliance. They couldn't. And they wouldn't realize it until they were sitting at that fancy signing table, reaching for a pen and finding the page blank until I filled it in. They say systems are only as strong as their weakest link. What they don't say is this: if you're the one who built the links, you decide where the chain snaps. So I started threading hooks, soft, deliberate, invisible teeth inside the gears of the machine they thought ran itself. First stop, merchant accounts. We had 4 processors over 12 years, each grandfathered in under different compliance terms, with IDs and back-end routing numbers so arcane they made finance flinch. I pulled up each agreement. One required custodian sign-off for ownership change. Another included an inactive clause labeled custodial handoff authorization, buried in the renewal schedule. Nobody had ever triggered it, but the language was still valid. So I reconciled everything: current IDs, compliance logs, statement timelines. I filed a declaration of continuity tied to the successor clause and made sure every active account listed either me or June. Nothing would migrate until one of us approved the release. Not a dime. Next came the tax registrations. We had a compliance binder, paper, because someone up the chain didn't trust the cloud, that housed every filing from the last decade. I logged each city, county, and state registration, updated the custodian of record, and inserted 2 sentences at the bottom of every official contact form. All future correspondence regarding ownership or custodial handoff must be certified by the custodian or named successor. Contact without such documentation shall be considered non-binding. Was it aggressive? No. Was it thorough? Absolutely. Then the retention logs, the real crown jewels. Records going back to 2010, including the contracts no one knew still governed some of our biggest clients. There was a clause in our core compliance policy that read, "Retention authorizations shall be verified through custodial oversight." I'd written that line myself back in 2015 when someone accidentally shredded a vendor contract during office renovations. No one ever asked to change it, so I used it. I updated the retention log index to include a QR-linked custodial access tracker. Anyone requesting documents after transfer would need my credentials, or June's, and both of us were about to be very unavailable unless terms were met. The originals? All wet ink versions, permits, charter amendments, multi-agency letters had already been moved to the bank box. But now I added an index printout. Box number, custodian access code. 2 key holders listed, Eva Reyes and June Park. No alternates. I uploaded the new custodian index to the diligence drive at 11:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 days before signing. At 11:59 a.m., the buyer's agent replied, "Received. Filed for closing, thank you." He CC'd legal. Legal responded with a single thumbs up emoji. Nothing else. They didn't open it, didn't read it, didn't ask a single follow-up, and that's the moment I knew it was going to work. They were treating diligence like a checklist, not a system, and they'd already decided I wasn't part of the equation. They didn't understand that every dotted line in that index was live wire, every file a tripwire tied to signatures they didn't control. They didn't see me, but they'd see my work when it refused to move without my ink. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and watched the reflection of my screen in the window. It looked like calm, but I was already tightening the last stitch. They called it the Integration Summit, but it was really just theater, stage lighting for the people who like to hear themselves talk. The long walnut conference table was polished to a smug shine, water bottles aligned like soldiers. Someone had even brought in fruit trays like vitamin C could offset the stench of arrogance in the room. I walked in 10 minutes early, binder in hand, and no one looked up. Rick, our fearless owner, was already holding court at the head of the table, laughing too loud, tie already loose like he was born on a yacht. When I sat down, he didn't acknowledge me, just flipped to the agenda and cleared his throat like a substitute teacher trying to look important. Okay, he began, tapping his knuckle against the wood. We've got buyer rep in later, so let's tighten up. Ops will be lean post-close. Some roles, supportive ones, will transition out after knowledge transfer. He glanced at me then, all smooth cruelty. Eva here will help with the knowledge transition. She's been with us a long time, knows the paper side of things, binders mostly. Someone in finance let out a tight chuckle. He kept going, like that wasn't enough. Let's not overcomplicate it. We're digitizing everything anyway. Shared drives will pick up most of the lift. Honestly, it's overhead we can trim. No mention of June, not a word. He erased us like someone shaking an Etch-A sketch. I didn't blink. I didn't correct him. I slid my spare badge from my lanyard, placed it on the table in front of me, and nudged it forward with one finger like a poker chip. Rick barely glanced at it. No need for the dramatics, Eva. You're part of the story. We just need to move with the future in mind. That was when I opened my binder. Vanilla manila tabs, standard Office Depot spine. No leather, no gold trim, no do not copy stamp. Just a simple, boring-looking thing. Exactly how I wanted it. Because the trick was never the appearance. It was the authority printed inside. I slid it onto the table and let it sit there. Close enough for someone to touch, but not so close that they'd risk looking desperate. Nobody reached for it. I watched them shuffle through their glossy slide decks, their product roadmaps, their Q4 forecasts. I waited. The agenda was 10 pages. I saw someone flip to the back, then flip back again. Page 9. Continuity writer, final review. Buried between lunch orders and welcome kits for buyer team. No one said a word about it. But I saw the project lead frown at it for a second longer than he meant to. Rick was already moving on, thanking everyone for their vision, talking about how exciting it was to have streamlined roles. I kept my expression blank, my hands folded. Let them have their performance. Let them forget that the binder they were ignoring held every legal hook into the infrastructure they were buying. They thought the signature part would be ceremonial. That I'd be handed a clipboard and asked to bless the merger like a nice old church lady who files things. They had no idea that the paper they were skipping over was the only thing standing between them and regulatory paralysis. I left the room before the fruit trays started sweating. No goodbyes, just the quiet click of the door behind me and the binder still sitting there, smiling its paperclip smile. They thought it was over. I was already standing in the wings, script in hand, waiting for the curtain to fall. The signing room looked like money had been ironed into every surface. Leather chairs nobody ever sat in. Coffee that cost more per cup than most people's lunch. Polished tables so shiny it reflected the pens. 12 of them, arranged in a perfect little line like soldiers, preparing to conquer bureaucracy. Everyone had their roles. Rick played confidence, the kind that grins wide and says nothing of substance. The bankers played patience, murmuring into devices, tapping notes like they'd already spent their commissions. I stood at the edge, binder tucked under one arm, hands relaxed. June wasn't in the room. That was by design. She was on standby, watching the clock and waiting for a call that might come or might not, depending on how thick Rick's skull turned out to be. Rick opened with a joke. Something about how fast deals move when lawyers stay out of the way. Everyone chuckled. Even counsel smiled thinly, though he looked more tired than amused. They were all half an inch from congratulating themselves. The paperwork sat in glossy folders beside sparkling water bottles, untouched, still breathing. And that's when the buyer's agent reached out and pinched something off the stack. Not a contract. Not the sale agreement. My rider. Before we execute, he said, turning the page slowly, there's a rider in the diligence packet I'd like to clarify about the asset transfer requirements. Rick waved a dismissive hand. Probably just a formality. Most of that's been digitized, shared access, centralized archives. Our teams streamlined it. The agent didn't look up. He was reading now. His mouth moved once, then stopped. This says, asset transfer of occupancy, merchant processing, and data retention are contingent on custodial or successor countersignature. Someone coughed. The air felt like it leaned forward. I don't recall seeing a signature page for these releases. The agent said calmly, did we receive the necessary authorization from... He scanned the line. Eva Reyes or June Park? Rick blinked. I mean, Eva's here. She's part of the transition team. It's ceremonial. We've already assigned internal leads to pick up access. The banker on his left shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to suggest a problem had surfaced. The buyer's counsel flipped open a binder, one clearly better organized than any of Rick's. Page tabs in red, one of them marked with a single word, custody. He drew it out like a fencer lining up a strike. 3 items had red asterisks. 3. Occupancy certificate, custodian sign-off required. Merchant processing migration, successor approval required. Data retention logs, continuity declaration required. He didn't need to say it. I already had. I stepped forward, slow, controlled. Binder in hand, I placed it on the table without a sound and opened it to the writer's original. Rick finally glanced over. His eyes stuck to the signature line. Blank. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The agent asked again, softer this time. Can you confirm whether these have been executed per the writer? The room inhaled. This was the second the match hit the box. The moment between silence and flame. You could feel it in the way no one reached for their pen. Without me, or June, nothing moved. Not the permits, not the processors, not the regulatory logs that would get the deal certified on the other side. They'd walked all the way to the altar with a bride they'd ghosted. I folded my hands, looked directly at Rick, and waited. The ink wasn't dry because I hadn't touched the pen. And now, finally, they noticed. The buyer's counsel finally broke the silence. He cleared his throat once, like he needed to swallow something stuck between pride and panic, and read the sentence aloud. Transfer shall be executed by the record's custodian or named successor. His voice was flat, clipped, but it wavered on the word successor. Then he read the line beneath it. Named successor, June Park. He looked up slowly. His eyes found mine like a man realizing he's been driving toward a cliff with the headlights off. Rick shifted in his seat, trying to look like he still understood what was going on. So, what's the issue? I mean, we're covered. Eva's right here. But I didn't respond. I let the bank speak first. The dial-in speaker clicked to life. A man's voice, calm, professional, unmistakably corporate, cut across the table. We're reviewing custodial controls now. Please confirm that all asset class transfers under retention, occupancy, and merchant processing have been signed off by the named custodian or designated successor. Rick froze. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then another ping, this time from the regulatory compliance portal. The buyer's chief compliance officer held up her phone and said quietly, "We just received a prompt from municipal licensing. They're requesting confirmation of the custodian on record for occupancy at close of business." The air in the room changed. It thinned, like someone had cracked a window in a submarine. I watched Rick deflate, not in volume, but in command. His posture sank by degrees. The man who had once joked about pretending I didn't exist now looked like he was seeing me for the first time, and it terrified him. Because the truth was simple. After 5:01 p.m., they couldn't run the building without me. They couldn't migrate the payments. They couldn't pull up retention logs for an audit. They couldn't even enter certain restricted sections of the facility because the access controls were tied to documentation that required my wet signature, or June's. They'd sold a body without its spine. And now the buyer realized they'd need surgery to stand up by Monday. I leaned forward, just enough for my voice to carry. June is standing by, but she hasn't received an appointment letter, and I haven't signed. The banker said, "So nothing moves." I nodded once. Not legally. The writer wasn't a trap. It was a mirror, and right now they were finally looking into it and seeing what they'd erased. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat there and breathed, a full, quiet inhale, because in that moment, every time I'd been dismissed, every meeting where my voice was ignored, every office mom comment, every eye roll when I asked for compliance sign-off, it all compressed into that one long breath, and I let it out slow, controlled, like I'd been waiting years for it. The pen sat untouched, the sail sat frozen, and I sat there, visible, irreplaceable, unbothered. Rick did what men like him always do when the curtain drops and the spotlight swings somewhere they didn't expect. He blustered, raised his voice, gestured wildly, threw around phrases like internal miscommunication and non-material rider, like sound could substitute for structure. "This is insane," he snapped. "We've had a clean process. Eva, you've always been a team player. This isn't the time for—" "Team player?" I asked softly. He went quiet. Across the table, the buyer's agent didn't look at Rick. He looked at me, leaned in slightly and whispered, "We need your signature, or this walks." That's when the heads turned. The tension, once hidden beneath smiles and spreadsheets, turned visible. Executives, bankers, legal, all suddenly aware of the invisible net that had caught their entire deal mid-air. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand up or slide my binder across the table. I simply placed my hand on the table and began listing terms. 1, I said, 12-month retention for all hourly staff. No layoffs, no hour cuts, no restructuring excuses in writing. Someone from HR opened their mouth. I held up a finger and kept going. 2, a continuity retainer for myself. I will not be an employee. I will be a consultant. My rate, my hours, scope limited to transition guidance only, monthly cap to be negotiated. 3, I continued, June Park is to be formally appointed as records custodian with full authority and access effective immediately. Title and documentation filed with the city, the banks, the merchant processors, and included in the transition press release. Rick's jaw clenched. The same man who once told June to just observe for now was watching his entire future rest on her signature. 4, I said with finality. All backlogged compliance overtime logged in the last 2 fiscal years is to be paid out in full, retroactively, at the adjusted rate. No one argued. The buyer's general counsel, who'd been silent since the room caught fire, flipped to the last page of the packet and flattened it out with his palm. It was already formatted. Successor custodian. Continuity services. He looked at me. May I? I nodded. He began writing. Rick tried one more time, voice deflating. Ava, you could have come to me. We could have handled this internally. I did, I said, still calm. You said I was just binders. Someone coughed. The agent handed a pen across the table. I'll want June's signature next, I said, and confirmation of her appointment filed with the regulator before 5 p.m. today. Done, said the buyer. No hesitation. It wasn't revenge, it was correction. They could keep their apologies. I had terms. And now they were the ones signing on my line. Rick couldn't help himself. Even cornered, even stripped of leverage and bleeding credibility in front of a table full of buyers and lawyers. He leaned back in his chair and muttered it under his breath, just loud enough for the nearby banker to hear. Her? Pretend she doesn't exist. This time, no one laughed. Not even the sycophants. His own attorney, cheeks flushed with quiet rage and professional shame, didn't respond. Just pulled the amendment packet closer, clicked his pen, and slid the final page across the polished table toward me like it weighed 100 pounds. No eye contact. Just the exhausted surrender of someone who knew exactly how deep they'd let the arrogance rot. I took my time reading it. Not for drama, just clarity. Everything we'd agreed to was there. June's name typed in sharp black letters under successor custodian. My consulting clause, clean and enforceable. Hourly protections in writing. The retro pay anchored in the ledger. I signed. 1 stroke. 1 second. A decade of erasure undone with a pen that finally pointed the right direction. The page was passed to June, who had quietly entered the room behind me like a whisper. No one noticed her until she was already halfway through her signature. They looked at her like a shadow they'd overlooked, now suddenly casting light. She signed, then slid the folder to the buyer's counsel. The banker dialed in confirmation. Custodial sign-off received. The regulator's system chimed, an automated ping confirming continuity had been cleared. And the buyer? He let out a breath so heavy it sounded like a man coming up for air after weeks underwater. We're clear to close. No applause, no champagne, just the faint buzz of fluorescent lighting and the rustle of papers being reshuffled like shame. The deal closed under my terms. June had the title. The staff kept their jobs. And me? I left the table without a word. Pulled the lanyard from my neck, laid the old badge on the marble edge by the door, and walked out. No victory speech, just a woman who'd built the backbone of a company, watched them try to snap it, and calmly reminded them where the weight really lived. They tried to erase me from the story, but when the page needed signing, when the ink had to mean something, they came looking for the ghost in the basement with the binder full of power. They wrote me out of the picture, so I framed it and signed the mat.